In the pulsating heart of the metropolis, where stories intertwine and vanish among the myriad lights of the city, Valeria, a young and enterprising journalist, received an assignment that would forever change her career, and perhaps her very existence. Her editor had given her a challenging yet fascinating task to conduct a thorough investigation into the living conditions inside the city's renowned psychiatric institution, a place shrouded in mystery and marked by tales of pain and neglect. Armed with a notebook, voice recorder, and unwavering determination, Valeria crossed the threshold of the institution with the intent to give voice to those who were too often forgotten by the outside world. She was granted limited and strictly monitored access, but Valeria knew that to capture the true essence of the place, she would have to push beyond the boundaries set by the management. Taking advantage of moments when the staff was distracted, and with the discretion that only true passion for journalism can teach, she began to secretly interview some of the patients. Their stories were fragments of broken lives, shattered dreams, and cries for help muffled by silence. Valeria listened, recorded, and with every word, felt a mix of anger and compassion growing with her. It was during one of these clandestine meetings that Valeria first heard the name Lucas. "Be careful with Lucas," a patient whispered to her with a look that oscillated between fear and madness. "He's not like us, but here he shouldn't be." Intrigued and somehow drawn to this mysterious figure, Valeria decided she had to meet him, to understand his story, to unveil the veil of mystery that seemed to envelop him. It wasn't long before their paths crossed. Lucas was a young man with a neat appearance, with an intensely lucid gaze that seemed out of place in such a setting. Talking to him, Valeria uncovered the heartbreaking truth. Lucas was there voluntarily, pretending to be a patient to stay close to his mother, who was also admitted to the institution. His was a sick devotion, a morbid attachment that led him to give up his own life, not to abandon his maternal figure. In moments of clarity, Lucas opened up to Valeria, talking about himself and his mother with disarming frankness. The journalist couldn't help but feel empathy for him, seeing in Lucas not just the subject of an article, but a person deeply wounded by life. However, the shadows quickly thickened. Without warning, Lucas switched from a calm conversation to a state of violent aggression, a radical change that made Valeria suspect he suffered from a dual personality disorder. In one of these episodes, Lucas tried to harm her, convinced at that moment that Valeria was a threat to him and his mother. Valeria, thanks to her courage and quick thinking, managed to escape Lucas's grasp and flee the institution, taking with her the recordings of their conversations and a story that would shake public opinion. Back at the editorial office, she told everything to her editor, and together they decided to report Lucas to the authorities. However, when the officers began to investigate, they discovered that, according to the institution's records, Lucas had died about 2 years prior. No one with that name had been admitted to the institution since then. This revelation plunged Valeria into an abyss of doubts and questions. Had she really spoken with Lucas? Or, as the officers suggested, had her time spent in the institution begun to influence her perception of reality? Valeria's article on the conditions within the psychiatric institution caused a sensation, but the story of Lucas remained an unresolved mystery, an enigma that continued to haunt her. Had she encountered a ghost, a lost soul wandering the halls of the institution, or had she been a victim of her own mind, deceived by the echo of forgotten stories? In a peaceful residential neighborhood of San Francisco, California, where streets wind through breathtaking views and picturesque homes, the life of a young couple seemed serene and untroubled. Eva and Lucas, who had been living together for about 6 years, had shared joys, plans, and daily routines, building what seemed to be a strong relationship, or so it appeared. Lately, however, Eva had begun to notice changes in Lucas's behavior. Once affectionate and open, he had become distant, reserved, and at times almost cold. One evening, when they were having dinner together, Eva decided to use Lucas's phone to send herself some photos from his brother's recent wedding, captured in moments of happiness and carefree joy. While navigating through the apps in search of the gallery, her eyes landed on an unfamiliar icon, X Browser. Driven by curiosity, she asked Lucas what it was, but his reaction was unexpectedly harsh and disproportionate. He had snatched the phone from her hands with a brusque gesture, warning her never to touch it again. Eva was taken aback. Initially, she thought it might be a dating app or something similar, but the reality she was about to discover was infinitely darker. A few days later, Lucas forgot his phone at home while he was out grocery shopping. Moved by a mix of curiosity and anxiety, Eva opened X browser, and at first did not understand exactly what it was. As she delved deeper, she realized it was the dark web. She had heard about it in college, because some classmates often talk about this shadowy side of the internet. Those stories came flooding back and helped her understand what she was seeing. Scrolling through the browser tabs, however, what she saw left her speechless. Dozens of tabs open with detailed discussions on how to murder one's partner without leaving a trace. Eva's world collapsed at that moment. Lucas's strange behavior over the past few months, his coldness, his avoidance, it all now made a terrible sense. Panicked and desperate, Eva fled their home, running to the nearest police station to report what she had discovered. The police acted immediately. That same evening, Lucas was interrogated, and both his phone and computer were searched. The evidence was overwhelming. Lucas was indeed planning Eva's murder. The exchanges on X browser with an anonymous user revealed meticulous advice on how to carry out the act and create poisons with substances easily found at home. During the interrogation, Lucas confessed to his sinister plan. The reason? Eva wanted to get married, dreaming of a shared life full of bounds and promises, but Lucas wanted no such deep commitment. However, he had already been planning to leave her, but Eva, in love and trusting in their relationship, did not want to accept the end of their union. Lucas was arrested, leaving the San Francisco community in a state of shock and disbelief. The story of Eva and Lucas became a cautionary tale about the shadows that can hide behind the facades of normality, the importance of listening to one's instincts, and the need to pay attention to often overlooked signals that those closest to us can send.
Marco and Valentina were a couple like many others, with their dreams and aspirations, determined to enjoy a long-awaited vacation at a picturesque resort on the Florida coast. Their relationship, as solid as it appeared to the world, hid fragilities that a vacation in the sun was supposed to heal. Instead, paradise turned into a nightmare when Marco, charmed by the hotel receptionist, a certain Alicia, decided to make a wrong move. Valentina discovered the incident almost by accident, catching an overly intense gaze between Marco and Alicia. Their relationship, already tested by doubts and daily misunderstandings, did not withstand this additional blow. Valentina, hurt and indignant, ended their story, refusing to listen to Marco's excuses. The situation took an unexpected turn the following day, when Marco disappeared without a trace. Valentina, still angry and disappointed, did not report the disappearance, convinced that Marco had decided to extend his adventure with Alicia. She returned to the city alone, renting a car and leaving behind the resort and the memories of a failed vacation. When Marco's parents, worried about the lack of news from their son, contacted Valentina, the girl was forced to reveal the end of their relationship and the suspicious circumstances that had surrounded Marco's disappearance. Not believing that their son could have voluntarily ceased all contact, the parents insisted that Valentina provide more details about their last meeting. Under the pressure of Marco's family and the authorities, Valentina recounted the encounter between Marco and Alicia, revealing the reason for their breakup. The investigation then focused on the mysterious receptionist. What emerged was a disturbing picture. Alicia had been involved in past incidents of missing persons and drug cases. The police discovered that the young woman had a dark past, linked to stories of seduction and drugs, used to manipulate her conquests. Alicia's arrest shed light on a series of mysterious disappearances that had occurred in the previous months, all linked to young tourists who had stayed at the resort. As the authorities tried to reconstruct the events and find traces of Marco's fate, Valentina faced the reality of a vacation turned into tragedy. The incident left deep scars on all involved. Marco's parents lived in anguish, not knowing what had happened to their son, while Valentina struggled with guilt for not immediately reporting the disappearance. Despite the end of the investigation and Alicia's arrest, unanswered questions about Marco's fate continued to torment Valentina's nights. The mystery of Marco's disappearance seemed destined to remain unsolved until, on a day like any other, a shocking discovery changed everything. Following an anonymous tip, the police inspected an abandoned basement within the hotel, a forgotten place that concealed a horrible secret. There, among the shadows and penetrating cold, they found Marco, still alive, but in poor condition. The young man had suffered sexual abuse and showed clear signs of having been drugged, deprived of his memory and the ability to fully understand what had happened to him. The discovery of Marco was a relief mixed with horror for all those who had desperately searched for him. For Valentina, the news was a blow to the heart. On one hand, the joy of knowing Marco was alive. On the other, deep pain for the sufferings he had had to endure. In the following months, Marco embarked on a difficult recovery process, trying to piece together the parts of a life that had been brutally torn from him. Therapy sessions and the support of loved ones gradually allowed him to face the trauma experienced and start looking forward to the future with some hope. Valentina stood by his side on this journey, offering support and comfort despite the weight of their past relationship. However, both knew that what had happened had left two deep scars, irrevocably changing their relationship. The closeness born from sharing such a traumatic experience was not enough to rekindle the feeling that had once united them. In the end, Marco and Valentina took separate paths, aware that some wounds, even as they begin to heal, would always mark their journey. Their story, which began with the promise of happy days under the Florida sun, ended with the harsh reality that sometimes life imposes challenges too difficult for a couple to find their way back to love. Claudia was the kind of person who found comfort in routines. Every Saturday morning, her ritual included a visit to the local supermarket, a small building nestled between the city streets where the noise of traffic turned into a dull background hum. Her path through the aisles was almost always the same, a well-trodden route that took her from fresh produce to detergents to the checkout. However, that Saturday would be different. As she approached the cereal section, a piece of paper abandoned in a corner caught her attention. It was a shopping list, written in tight, neat handwriting. On a sudden impulse, driven by curiosity and a desire to break the monotony of her day, Claudia decided to pick it up. The list contained a series of items: salt, dish detergent, bleach, plant antiparasitic, and a variety of foods. "Let's make it a game," thought Claudia, smiling at the unusual challenge. She began to collect the listed items, moving through the aisles with a new purpose. Each product seemed mundane individually, but as she accumulated them in her cart, a sense of unease began to creep inside her. Salt, detergent, bleach, antiparasitic. There was a strange resonance in that combination, an undertone she couldn't decipher right away. After finishing her shopping, Claudia headed to the checkouts, the list clenched in her hands. While waiting her turn, she reflected on the strangeness of her errand. Who would ever need these items together? She wondered. She couldn't find a satisfactory answer. Once home, she decided to investigate a bit about that combination of products. She turned on her computer and started searching. That's when a chill ran down her spine. Salt, detergent, bleach, antiparasitic. Separately harmless. Together, they could create a dangerously toxic mixture. But why would someone want to buy all these products together? Was the author of that list planning to poison someone? That evening, Claudia couldn't get the idea out of her mind that, by collecting those items, she had unwittingly become an accomplice in a nefarious plan. She decided she had to do something. She returned to the supermarket, hoping to find clues, or perhaps to meet the mysterious author of the list. As soon as she returned to the supermarket, Claudia sought out the manager to share her concerns about the shopping list she had found. She expected understanding, perhaps even gratitude for shedding light on a potential danger. Instead, The manager listened with disconcerting vagueness, offering little more than a distracted glance at the list, and a "I'll take care of it, don't worry," that sounded empty and dismissive. Unsatisfied, Claudia approached another employee, hoping for a different reaction. However, her experience was similar: formal listening, minimal interest, and no concrete action. This series of reactions left her both frustrated and alarmed. She felt there was something deeper, a danger being ignored. With a growing sense of responsibility, she decided to turn to the police. There, her concerns were taken seriously. The officers listened attentively, nodded in front of the list of items, and started investigating without downplaying her fears. In the weeks that followed, a thorough investigation unveiled a shocking truth. One of the supermarket employees, known for his solitary behavior and some past conflicts, harbored deep resentment towards his boss. This grudge, grown in the shadow of monotonous workdays, had driven him to plan a final act of vengeance, poisoning his superior by putting a lethal mixture of chemicals in a drink during lunch break. The police discovered concrete evidence of the plan through messages saved on the employee's cell phone and testimonials from colleagues who, faced with the severity of the situation, recalled suspicious behaviors and comments made in the past. The employee was arrested before he could carry out his plan, thanks to the timely intervention based on the information provided by Claudia. The news of the arrest spread quickly, eliciting a mix of shock and relief among the supermarket employees and the local community. Claudia was praised for her determination and courage in following her instinct, a decision that had prevented a tragedy. Tamara, a woman in her 30s with a quiet and ordinary life, found herself suddenly plunged into a waking nightmare. It was a seemingly ordinary day, a simple errand at the neighborhood Walmart to buy a birthday present for her niece. But among the sterile and brightly lit aisles, Tamara stumbled upon a sight that shook her to the core: a ghost woman. The woman, middle-aged, with disheveled gray hair, wandered aimlessly through the supermarket, humming in an incomprehensible melody and gesturing as if she were talking to someone who wasn't there. Tamara, terrified and fascinated at the same time, approached the woman to offer help, but it was as if she didn't even hear her. Her gaze was lost in the void, her eyes bulged out of her sockets, and her face was pulled into a grimace of terror. Tamara walked away shaken, looking for a clerk who could help her. But when they returned to the spot where she had seen the ghost woman, she had vanished into thin air. The clerk, a corpulent and bored man, didn't believe her and dismissed the incident as a hallucination. In the following days, Tamara couldn't sleep at night. The image of the ghost woman haunted her, and her unease grew with each passing day. She began researching online, looking for stories similar to the one she had experienced. She found several cases of people who had seen ghosts in supermarkets, malls, and other public spaces. Increasingly convinced that she had seen a ghost, Tamara delved into the history of the Walmart. She discovered that the supermarket had been built on the site of an ancient Indian cemetery, which had been desecrated to make way for the shopping center. Legend has it that the spirits of the departed Indians had never found peace and still wandered the area, tormenting the living. Tamara was determined to learn more about the ghost woman and her lost child. She turned to an old bookseller, known for his knowledge of local folklore, who told her the tragic story of a mother who had lost her little boy in a fire that had devastated the supermarket many years earlier. She still wandered the aisles, searching for her son who was never found. Tamara felt guilty for disturbing the ghost woman and became convinced that the only way to help her was to find her child and give her a proper burial. With the help of the bookseller, who turned out to be an expert in the paranormal, Tamara organized a ritual to evoke the spirit of the child. The ritual was held at night, in the basement of the supermarket, among the ruins of the old Indian cemetery. Tamara, with her heart pounding, uttered the magic words and waited with trepidation. Suddenly, the air turned cold, and a thick fog enveloped the room. A heartbreaking cry echoed in the darkness, followed by a small, luminous figure that materialized in front of her. It was the ghost boy, who with a sad smile pointed to a specific spot on the floor. Tamara dug frantically and found a small skeleton wrapped in a white dress. With tears in her eyes, Tamara buried the child in a simple and moving ceremony. From the day Tamara gave the child a proper burial, the ghost woman never appeared to her again. The supermarket returned to being a quiet and ordinary place. Tamara, however, would never be the same. The experience had changed her deeply, making her more aware of the thin line that separates life from death, the real from the supernatural. The sun lazily set over the chaotic expanse of parked cars in front of the Target in San Jose, California. Emily, exhausted after a day of work, pushed the cart with one hand. While the other, she held tightly the hand of her little son, Luca, 4 years old. The child, with his lively and curious eyes, was attracted to every sparkle and bright color in the supermarket. While Emily lingered to choose the fruit, Luca stopped in front of a candy display, captivated by the images of gummy bears and lollipops. Emily looked at him for a moment, smiling at his innocent gluttony, then turned to get a bag. It was only a moment, a blink of an eye. When she turned back, Luca was gone. Panic gripped Emily's heart like an icy vice. She called his name loudly, scanning every corner of the department, but there was no sign of Luca. The crowd of people around her seemed like an indistinct blur of alien and indifferent faces. Desperate, Emily turned to the supermarket staff, who immediately alerted the police. The search started in a hurry, involving officers, sniffer dogs, and volunteers. The Target parking lot was combed inch by inch, while Luca's photo, with his blonde hair and blue eyes, bounced on the news and social media. The hours passed, turning into an endless nightmare. Emily couldn't sleep, eat, or think of anything but her child. She prayed, imploring the heavens to bring him home safe and sound. After 36 hours of agonizing waiting, an unexpected twist. A Target cashier, suspicious of a man who was entering and leaving the supermarket obsessively, had followed him undercover. The man had entered the parking lot, approached a car, and tried to open the back door. The cashier, sure it was a kidnapping, had called the police. The officers who intervened on the spot had blocked the man and found Luca hidden in the back seat of the car. The child was unharmed, but scared, still under the effect of a sedative that had been administered to him. The joy of finding Luca was immense. Emily hugged her child, flooding him with tears of joy and relief. The pain and fear she had experienced in recent days turned into deep gratitude for having found him safe and sound. The man who had tried to kidnap Luca was arrested and charged with kidnapping. The investigation revealed he was an individual with a criminal record for crimes against minors. The trial against the man was a tough test for Emily. She had to relive every moment of terror, every anguish, every shattered hope. But her tenacity and her desire for justice gave her the strength to face her tormentor, to look him in the eye, and to testify against him. The man was sentenced to 20 years in prison, a sentence that could not erase the pain of Emily and Luca, but which represented an act of justice and a warning against pedophilia and the exploitation of minors. The investigation revealed an even more chilling detail. The man was a follower of a satanic cult that practiced black magic rituals. He had tried to kidnap Luca to sacrifice him during a macabre ritual in the hope of obtaining dark powers. The discovery shocked the community. People were in disbelief in the face of such cruelty and obscurantism. Emily, already tried by her experience, found herself facing a new nightmare. The thought that her son had been one step away from a horrible death tormented her day and night. Despite the pain, Emily found the strength to react. She joined a group of people who fight against satanic cults and black magic. Together, they began to raise public awareness of these dangers, often underestimated. The story of Emily and Luca is a reminder not to underestimate the danger of certain individuals and certain practices. It teaches us that evil can also hide behind the most banal faces and that our vigilance is essential to protect our children. Furthermore, this story reminds us that the strength of motherly love and solidarity can overcome even the most difficult challenges. Emily and Luca survived a nightmare thanks to their courage and the support of those who helped them. Their story is a message of hope for all those who have experienced traumatic events. I found myself working the night shift at a gas station due to financial constraints and the need for a second job. For several months, I diligently fulfilled my duties during those late hours. However, after about 2 or 3 months, a peculiar man became a regular visitor. He would always show up around 2 a.m., standing tall at about 6 feet with long, unkempt hair. His routine consisted of purchasing a tall boy of alcohol and swiftly leaving the store. Gradually, he began taking an interest in me, asking for my name. As I shared my name, he repeated it with amusement, chuckling to himself. Opening his newly bought tall boy, he strolled out of the store, engaging in a drunken monologue. This particular night sparked my curiosity, leading me to observe if he was driving under the influence. To my surprise, he veered away from the gas station property, confirming my suspicion. It dawned on me that he never once bought gas during his visits. His sole purpose was to procure alcohol. This pattern persisted, with him appearing almost every night. Sometimes he was noticeably more intoxicated than others, while on certain occasions he would lean against the shelves in silence, not uttering a word. Nevertheless, he consistently greeted me with a casual, "Hey Rod," upon entering. One night, he stood by a shelf, silently consuming his tall boy, fixating his gaze on a wall. I finally mustered the courage to inquire about his name. After a brief pause, he looked at me and replied, "Bob." It struck me as a generic pseudonym one would choose when fabricating their identity. I wondered if he had inadvertently rhymed it with my name, Rod. Nonetheless, I went along with it, asking him where he worked. His laughter boomed, startling me, as he revealed that he was unemployed, having been wronged by the government. Though he appeared angry, he strangely acknowledged, "I like you, Rob. You seem like you know what you're doing." Puzzled by his statement, he promptly exited the store. Days went by without encountering him, which was unusual for a regular like him. Bob always emitted an unsettling, mildly creepy vibe. It was evident that something troubled him in his personal life, compounded by his perpetual state of inebriation. Then, one stormy night, the gas station had fewer customers due to the inclement weather. The sound of the front door chime rang through the air, and instinctively, I anticipated Bob's arrival. To my astonishment, it was indeed him, albeit a much more menacing version. He stood before me, completely drenched, devoid of a raincoat or umbrella. Clad in a dark shirt and jeans, his long hair dripping wet, he fixated on the wall with an anger-laden expression, while his mind seemed to wander aimlessly. His posture, blankly gazing at nothing, soaked to the bone, sent chills down my spine. Tentatively, I inquired if he was all right, but he remained motionless, his head unmoving, as he uttered, "I did something really bad." Anxiously, I probed further, asking what he had done. His gaze met mine, and after a brief pause, he uttered, "I need somewhere to hide." Bob proceeded to bypass me at the register and disappeared into the narrow hallway leading into the restroom. He entered one of the rooms, and I could hear the door closing behind him. An increasing unease settled within me. I never enjoyed Bob's presence in the store, and that night, there was an undeniable air of disturbance surrounding him. He resembled a zombie, and his remark about doing something terrible was profoundly unsettling. Time passed, and Bob did not emerge from the bathroom. I assumed he had succumbed to his inebriation, either passed out or succumbing to sickness. Unwilling to intervene, I continued with my duties. Then, in an instant, the lights in the store abruptly went out, enveloping it in complete darkness. Standing in a pitch-black gas station during a severe storm with an unhinged, intoxicated man, my heart raced. Using the flashlight concealed behind the counter, I cautiously navigated toward the back of the store, near the inventory storage and panel board. The restroom doors were situated within the same hallway. As I passed by, both doors stood ajar, but Bob was nowhere to be found inside either of them. Proceeding through the door to the back area, my intention was to reach the panel board. However, my footsteps halted as I caught a faint dripping sound emanating from somewhere within the room, accompanied by the squeaking of wet shoes. An overwhelming sense of dread washed over me, and, in a feeble, terrified voice, I called out, "Bob?" The squeaking noise grew closer, just to my left. Directing my flashlight toward that corner, I was greeted by Bob's wide-open eyes as he lunged at me, bellowing, "I'm gonna kill you!" Desperately, I pushed him away, his claws scratching at my back. Fleeing through the door to the front of the store, I found solace in the fact that he did not give chase. Hastily grabbing my rain jacket, I sprinted to my car, dialing 911, my trembling voice conveying the urgency of the situation to the operator. I remained on the line, providing updates until a pair of police cars promptly arrived and accompanied me inside. Bob was still concealed in the back room, huddled in a corner like a deranged creature, his dilated pupils revealing the influence of some substance. After recounting the events, the officers apprehended him and transported him to the station. It was only over a month later that I discovered Bob's real name was Martin, and he had gruesomely murdered his ex-wife on that very night he appeared at the gas station. In short, this harrowing experience shattered my desire to work night shifts or hold any job of its kind ever again.
On a stormy night, two figures stealthily moved through the woods surrounding the old Coldwater Asylum, an isolated facility notorious for its questionable practices and dangerous patients. These two escapees, Leo and Marco, were not just merely patients seeking freedom, but twisted minds determined to escape not just the asylum's walls, but also their past identities. Once outside, taking advantage of the darkness and the chaos caused by a sudden power outage within the institution, Leo and Marco crossed paths with a couple camping near the woods. With macabre cunning and cold violence, they overpowered the couple, eliminating them to assume their identities. Leo became Daniel, and Marco transformed into Thomas, using the unfortunate couple's documents and possessions to start a new life from the past that haunted them. But freedom and anonymity did not quell their darkest intents. Leo and Marco, now Daniel and Thomas, used their new identities not just to hide from those who might recognize them, but also to weave a web of deception and violence. They moved to a small town, where they began to construct a facade of normalcy, working by day and frequenting local spots by night, earning the trust and affection of the unsuspecting townsfolk. However, beneath this mask of everyday life, the two secretly plotted, planning acts of wickedness that reflected the distorted fantasies that had landed them in Coldwater Asylum. They began to manipulate the townspeople, sowing discord and suspicion, reveling in the power their anonymity and new identity gave them. The situation escalated when a series of mysterious events began to disturb the community. Petty thefts, anonymous threatening letters, and finally, a brutal murder that shook the town to its core. The local police, already overwhelmed, began to investigate, but Leo and Marco were always a step ahead, skillfully covering their tracks and manipulating evidence to frame innocence. Tension reached its peak when a young investigator, Sophia, began to connect the dots, noting inconsistencies in Daniel and Thomas's stories, and the strange coincidence of their arrival in town with the onset of nefarious events. Sophia, with her innate curiosity and analytical spirit, had started to notice small details that didn't add up about Daniel and Thomas. Despite the two having quickly integrated into the Willow Creek community, some aspects of their stories seemed forced, as if they had been crafted to fit the context. Sophia, having access to police files and national databases through her role as an investigator, decided to dig deeper. The breakthrough came when Sophia managed to track down an old photo from several years ago, showing Leo and Marco together in a context that left no doubt about their previous identities. It was a mugshot from the archives of an asylum located hundreds of miles from Willow Creek. The coincidence of their arrival in town with the start of a series of nefarious events could not be ignored. Determined to get answers, Sophia began to monitor Daniel and Thomas's movements, gathering evidence and documenting every suspicious act. She noticed that both showed a morbid interest in isolated places and the homes of some elderly and vulnerable members of the community. However, their presence in town was marked by a series of minor crimes and mysterious incidents that had gradually increased tension among the residents. Sophia decided to confront them directly, arranging a casual encounter in a public place. During the conversation, she made subtle references to information that only Leo and Marco could have known, closely observing their reactions. As suspected, for a moment, Daniel's, Leo's cunning, faltered, revealing a glimmer of recognition, quickly smothered by a sudden emotional breakdown. It was that brief exchange of looks that confirmed Sophia's suspicions. With the evidence collected and the growing awareness of the danger the two posed to the community, Sophia approached the local police chief, presenting a detailed case against Daniel and Thomas. The police, initially skeptical, were forced to consider their stance when Sophia revealed the mugshot and outlined the connection between the mysterious events and the arrival of the two in town. The night before the planned operation to capture the fugitives, Sophia felt restless. She had a strong feeling that Daniel and Thomas had sensed they were discovered and might attempt something extreme to escape capture. Her intuition proved correct when, in the early hours, a fire broke out in one of the houses the two had frequented. It was clear this was a diversion, a desperate attempt to create chaos and buy time to flee. Sophia and the police split up, some addressing the fire, while others, led by Sophia, pursued Daniel and Thomas. The chase turned into a tight pursuit through the deserted streets of Willow Creek, culminating into a confrontation at the old abandoned mill outside town. Here, surrounded and with no escape routes, Daniel and Thomas were finally captured. During the interrogation, the true identities of Leo and Marco were revealed, along with the nature of their crimes. The Willow Creek community was shocked to learn the truth, but also grateful for Sophia's cunning and courage, which had thwarted the evil plans of the two and restored peace to the small town. In a quiet suburb of Portland, Oregon, where homes blend harmoniously with the lush nature that characterizes the state, Nathan's life seemed to proceed without a hitch. Nathan, a computer programmer with a passion for mystery and the unknown, had always had an insatiable curiosity for the darker corners of the internet. His obsession with the dark web began as a simple hobby, a way to explore the hidden depths of cyberspace beyond the restrictions of the surface web. One night, as the city slept enveloped in autumnal fog, Nathan stumbled upon a dark web forum that promised access to a collection of unique experiences for those brave enough to explore it. Driven by curiosity, Nathan decided to dive into this unknown world, unaware of the consequences his choice would bring. The dark web, populated by hackers and unscrupulous individuals, easily traced his computer's IP address and, in turn, his home address. In the following days, he began receiving strange anonymous packages, small, seemingly meaningless objects, cryptic photographs of familiar-looking places, and letters written in code. Each item appeared to be part of a macabre puzzle that Nathan was forced to solve. His once calm and predictable life transformed into a sleepless nightmare, where the distinction between reality and the dark world of the dark web became increasingly blurred. Nathan realized too late that the forum was a front for a cult operating in the shadows, dedicated to dark practices and sinister rituals. The forum's users had been selected to become part of a perverse experiment aimed at testing the limits of human fear, manipulating their lives through hidden signals and subliminal messages scattered in the packages. One evening, as he tried to decipher the latest message received, Nathan heard noises coming from his garden. Looking out the window, he saw hooded figures gathered around a symbol traced on the lawn, illuminated by the dim of the moon. In that moment, he understood that the cult had crossed the digital barrier, invading the physical world to complete their ritual with him as the final sacrifice. Desperate and with no way out, Nathan contacted the police, but the communication seemed intercepted, leaving him isolated and vulnerable. In the darkest hours, before the cult members could reach him, he decided to use his programming skills to trace their origin on the dark web and send an SOS to a group of ethical hackers he had heard of. The hackers responded to his call, launching a digital offensive against the cult, exposing their identities and locations to the authorities. When the police arrived, they found Nathan unconscious, surrounded by the remains of what appeared to be a disrupted ritual. In the trial that followed, a network of crimes and mysteries that extended well beyond the city of Portland came to light, involving individuals around the world, lured and then trapped by the same curiosity that had led Nathan to the brink of ruin. Nathan, though safe, was never the same again. His foray into the dark web had left deep scars, a constant reminder of the dark depths lurking behind the computer screen.
Thomas and Emily had woven the threads of an intense and passionate relationship, exploring the less traveled paths of California, sharing dreams under starry skies, and planning a future together. However, beneath the surface of those shared experiences, deep cracks were hidden, marked by misunderstandings and jealousies that slowly eroded the foundation of their love story. The tension reached its peak when Emily began to harbor suspicions towards Thomas. Accusing him of infidelity, she spent hours scrutinizing Thomas's activities on Instagram, observing every exchange of messages with other people, interpreting every emoji and every late response as undeniable evidence of betrayal. The breakup, when it came, was abrupt and painful. Thomas tried to explain that his exchanges on Instagram were harmless, the result of conversations with old friends and acquaintances, but Emily refused to listen. Feeling betrayed and abandoned, she let pride and anger guide her actions in the following days. Emily's obsessive spiral reached its apex on a cold autumn evening when she followed Thomas to the local supermarket. As he shopped, unaware of her presence, Emily wandered the aisles, her heart pounding, consumed by a toxic mix of anger, pain, and desire for revenge. It was then that, passing by the butcher's counter, her eyes fell on an unattended knife. Without a second thought, she grabbed it, hiding it under her coat. When Thomas left the supermarket, Emily confronted him, drew the knife, and threatened him, demanding an explanation for the pain he had caused her. The scene attracted the attention of concerned passersby who immediately called the police. Upon the arrival of law enforcement, Emily was quickly disarmed and detained. Thomas, still shaken by the encounter, told the officers how in recent months, Emily had turned his life into a nightmare of incessant phone calls, threatening messages, and unexpected appearances. He also revealed how, perhaps exaggerating the details, he had seen her lurking near his home or workplace multiple times, behaviors he had chosen to ignore until then, hoping for a peaceful solution to their tormented situation. Based on the testimonies and evidence collected, the police proceeded with Emily's arrest. During the trial that followed, all elements of the case were examined, from the turbulent breakup of their relationship to the extreme actions taken by Emily that evening at the supermarket. Despite Emily's pleas, who tried to explain her behavior as the result of a moment of desperation, the court found her guilty of stalking and aggravated threat, sentencing her to 2 years in prison. The verdict marked a point of no return for both. Thomas, although relieved by the legal conclusion of the matter, could not help but reflect on the spiral of events that had led to such a tragic outcome. For Emily, the 2 years of imprisonment were a period of profound introspection, a time spent reflecting on her mistakes, the pain inflicted on Thomas, and the choices that had led her away from the person she once believed she was. The story I'm about to tell is incredible and connects with the world of the occult and paranormal. Emily was a college student who had just moved to a small town to continue her studies. The town had its own charm, with its cobblestone streets and a small supermarket that seemed straight out of the 1950s movie. It was there that her eyes met Jack's, the boy at the frozen food counter. He had a somewhat neglected appearance, but deep eyes and a shy smile that struck her from the very first moment. During one of her daily visits, Jack found the courage to leave her a note, hidden among the ice cream packages Emily was examining. It was an invitation for coffee, written in elegant handwriting she wouldn't have expected from him. Surprised, but intrigued, Emily accepted. Their meeting was enjoyable, and Jack proved to be an interesting conversationalist, able to make her laugh and think. However, over time, he began to show more insistent behavior. Constant messages, unexpected appearances outside the library or Emily's apartment, a tension that quickly became suffocating. Emily began to feel trapped, especially when she noticed that Jack's obsession was manifesting in a disturbing manner at the supermarket too. Every time she entered, she found him at his place, watching her with a fixed gaze, silently following her through the aisles without ever getting too close. The situation escalated when, one evening, Emily found dozens of notes stuck on her car, all with the same message: "I'm watching you." Frightened, she decided to confront Jack to ask him to leave her alone, but he denied any involvement, with a sincerity in his eyes that made her waver. That night, terror knocked on her window. A dark silhouette was staring at her from outside, motionless. She called the police, but when they arrived, they found no one. The officers suggested it might have been a bad dream, but Emily knew it wasn't. In the following days, the appearances and whispers became more frequent and threatening, until she found a message written in lipstick on her front door. "You can't escape me." Desperate, Emily, after some time with a bit of courage, returned to the supermarket to confront Jack, but found his place empty. Asking around, she learned something shocking. Jack had died in a car accident months before, right when Emily had started feeling observed. Shaken by the revelation, Emily realized that what was haunting her was something far darker and inexplicable. The supermarket, with its dark corners and cold air leaking from the refrigerators, had become the stage for an endless nightmare. Emily knew she had to find a way to escape this obsession before it was too late. With a heavy heart and a mind clouded by fear, Emily faced a reality that defied all logic. The idea that Jack's obsession could persist beyond death was something she couldn't understand or accept. Determined to end this nightmare, she began seeking help, turning not only to the police, but also to experts in paranormal phenomena, hoping to find an explanation, or better yet, a solution. Her research led her to discover that the supermarket had been built on land that previously housed an old factory, the site of a tragic accident that had claimed the lives of many workers, including, it was said, a young man in love with the owner's daughter. Past stories suggested that the land was cursed, a place of great sorrow and loss, where restless souls found no peace. Armed with this new knowledge and unshakable determination, Emily decided to confront Jack's spirit directly. One night, after mentally and spiritually preparing herself, she entered the supermarket after closing hours, gaining access thanks to a friend who worked there. The air was cold, and the dark aisles were illuminated by the light of the torch Emily held tightly in her hand. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of her steps and her racing heart. Arriving at the frozen food counter, the place she felt was the center of the energy that bound her to Jack, Emily stopped and, with a trembling but clear voice, began to speak.
"Jack, if you're here, please let me go,"
she said, her words laden with emotion.
"I don't know why you're tied to this place, or to me, but you need to find peace. You have to let us both go."
For what seemed like an eternity, nothing happened. Then, suddenly, a cold wind enveloped her, and the supermarket's lights flickered violently. Emily felt Jack's presence next to her, a dense and sad energy, but not threatening. The appearances and messages stopped that night. Emily never knew for sure what had actually happened in the supermarket, or if her words had truly reached Jack. However, she felt a lightness she hadn't felt in months, as if a weight had been lifted from her heart. Over time, Emily's life returned to normal, but the experience changed her in indelible ways. She had faced her fears, confronting the incomprehensible, and emerged stronger. The supermarket remained a part of the city, but for Emily, it became a symbol of resilience, a reminder that she looked into the darkness and found the light. Facing an ordeal that defied explanation, Emily learned the importance of seeking help and confronting one's fears, no matter how paranormal or unexplainable they may seem. Her story spread, becoming a beacon of hope for others experiencing their own unexplainable phenomena, reminding them that they are not alone and that sometimes courage and a willingness to face the unknown can bring peace. The supermarket continued to operate, Its aisles and freezers witness to a story that blurred the lines between this world and the next. Employees and customers alike felt a subtle shift, a sense of calm that hadn't been there before, as if acknowledging the peace Emily had fought so hard to achieve. As for Emily, she became an advocate for those experiencing paranormal harassment, sharing her story in forums and support groups, offering her insights and support. She realized that her encounter with Jack, while terrifying, had given her a purpose and a message to share. That love and determination can transcend even the boundaries of death, and that sometimes the most haunting mysteries have resolutions that bring not just closure, but healing. Her experience at the supermarket turned from a haunting memory to a pivotal chapter in her life, teaching her about the depths of the human spirit and the power of compassion. Emily's journey through fear and darkness into understanding and peace inspired many, showing that even in the face of the paranormal, one can find a way back to the light. Darkness enveloped the San Diego Walmart like a shroud. The neon lights turned off one by one, left only the dim glow of emergency lights to illuminate the deserted aisles. An eerie silence reigned, broken only by the hum of the refrigerating machinery and the rustle of autumn leaves blowing against the windows. Michael, a middle-aged janitor with a passion for poetry and a sensitive soul, woke up with a start in his storage room. A faint moan, almost a whisper, had torn him from sleep. He looked around, confused and disoriented. The darkness was pitch black, and the only light came from a thin strip that filtered under the door. Driven by an irresistible curiosity, Michael got up and approached the door. He pressed his ear to the wood and listened intently. The moan became clearer, a female voice pleading from somewhere in the supermarket.
Help!
Michael stiffened. The voice was faint, but laden with pain and anguish. A shiver ran down his spine. Who could it be? And why were they still in the supermarket at that hour? Armed with only an old mop and his courage, Michael opened the door and ventured into the darkness. The moan grew louder, guiding him like a lifeline through the deserted aisles. The cold air pinched his skin, while a sense of unease grew within him. Illuminated by the dim glow of an emergency light, a female figure stood among the crates of fruit and vegetables. She was a young woman, with long brown hair and a face as pale as the moon. Her eyes were wide and staring, filled with an infinite sadness. Michael stood speechless, petrified with fear. The woman was dressed in a white dress, stained with dirt and blood. Her hands were cold and trembling.
Help me,
she pleaded in a whisper. A strangled scream erupted from Michael's throat. He turned and ran away, terrified. The woman's moan chased him into his nightmares throughout the night. The following days were a torment for Michael. He couldn't forget the ghost woman and her heartbreaking plea. He was torn between fear and guilt. He had to help her, but how? Michael began investigating the ghost woman. He searched for information online, consulted books on the paranormal, and questioned his colleagues. No one knew anything about a woman who died in the supermarket, but everyone agreed that the produce department was haunted by disturbing presences. Driven by an invincible force, Michael returned to the produce department. The ghost woman was still there, waiting. This time, Michael didn't run away. He approached her cautiously and asked, "Who are you? What happened to you?" The woman told Michael her tragic story. She had been a college student, brutally murdered by a maniac right in the supermarket. Her body had never been found. Michael listened to the ghost woman's story with compassion. He promised to help her find peace and catch her killer. Together, they began an investigation to uncover the truth and finally bring justice to the woman. Michael and the ghost woman, who introduced herself as Sarah, combed through the supermarket looking for clues. Sarah remembered little of her murder, just a man with cold eyes and a shiny blade. Michael, using his knowledge of the supermarket and his intuition, tried to reconstruct the events of her tragic death. After days of fruitless searching, Michael found a hidden trapdoor in the back of the produce department. The trapdoor led to a dark and dusty basement, which the employees never accessed, and where Michael found an old trunk. Inside the trunk were Sarah's remains, along with a diary that told her story and the identity of her killer, the owner of the supermarket. Michael confronted the owner of the supermarket, an arrogant and unscrupulous man. Michael reported everything to the police. The man, caught red-handed, confessed to Sarah's murder and the murders of other women. He was arrested and sentenced to life in prison. With the capture of the killer, Sarah finally found peace. Her soul was finally able to rest, and her ghost vanished into thin air. Michael, though scarred by the experience, felt relieved to have helped bring justice to Sarah. Michael returned to his old life, but the experience with the ghost woman changed him forever. He had learned that the world is a mysterious place, and that sometimes the line between life and death is thinner than we think. He had also learned that courage and compassion are the most powerful weapons against injustice and evil. The cold night air enveloped the target like a shroud. The once bright neon lights now emitted a dim and ghostly light, creating long shadows that writhed on the walls and floor. The aisles, once bustling with customers, were now silent and empty, except for the distant hum of a refrigeration machine that pulsed rhythmically in the darkness. Ethan, the night janitor, walked around with his metal cart, checking that the doors were closed and the cash registers were turned off. He was a middle-aged man with a face marked by fatigue and years. His eyes, once lively, were now dull and opaque, as if he had seen too many things in his life. He had worked at Walmart for almost 20 years, and he knew every corner of that supermarket like the back of his hand. Every shelf, every aisle, every product had its place in his memory, a mental map that guided him in the darkness of the night. As he walked down the food aisle, his gaze was caught by a shadow moving quickly between the shelves. He stopped, his heart pounding in his throat. A shiver of cold ran down his spine. Not the icy cold of the night, but a deeper, more sinister cold, as if an invisible presence was watching him. The shadow stopped and turned towards him. Ethan held his breath. He was a bearded man with long, dirty hair that framed his face like a wild mane. His yellow eyes shone in the darkness like those of a wolf, emanating an eerie and disturbing light. His face was emaciated, marked by deep wrinkles and a thick, unkempt beard. He wore tattered, dirty clothes, which emanated a pungent odor of sweat and mold. Ethan suddenly felt vulnerable, alone in that maze of silent aisles. His cart creaked ominously with each step, amplifying his sense of unease. A lump of fear formed in his throat, making it difficult to breathe. What are you doing here?" Ethan asked with a trembling voice, trying to remain calm. The bearded man looked at him with a sinister smile, revealing yellow and ruined teeth. "I am just waiting," he replied in a hoarse voice, as if he hadn't spoken in a long time. Waiting for what?" Ethan asked, increasingly worried. "The right moment," the bearded man replied, with an enigmatic tone that chilled Ethan's blood. Ethan didn't understand what the man meant, but he knew it wasn't a good thing. A sense of terror gripped him, as if an imminent danger was threatening him. He turned and tried to escape, but the bearded man was right behind him. Ethan ran through the dark aisles, the bearded man chasing him like a fury. His cart overturned, hitting the shelves, knocking over cans and boxes that resounded in the silence with a deafening din. His panting, mixed with the creaking of the cart and the noise of his footsteps, creating a cacophony of terror that echoed through the empty supermarket. Ethan felt the bearded man's hand grab his shoulder, an iron grip that paralyzed him, as if a grip of ice that had blocked his body. He turned and looked him in the eyes, terrified. His yellow eyes shone with an evil light, as if he were possessed by a demonic force. The bearded man pushed him against a metal shelf, with inhuman strength that crushed him against the cold sheets. Ethan tried to defend himself, but it was like fighting a bear. His hand, calloused and ruined by work, clenched against the bearded man's powerful arms, trying in vain to free himself from his grip. The bearded man looked at him with a cruel smile as his bristly beard rubbed against Ethan's face. "You have no escape," he said in a hoarse voice, as if he were pronouncing a death sentence. Ethan felt the terror rise in his throat, a wave of panic that was about to overwhelm him. His vision blurred, his muscles weakened, and the pressure of the bearded man's hand on his throat became increasingly strong. In a last desperate attempt to save himself, Ethan grabbed a can of preserves that had fallen to the ground during his escape. With all his strength, he lifted it and hit the bearded man on the head with violence. The bearded man staggered back, stunned by the blow. Ethan took advantage of this to free himself from his grip and ran again. The pain in his shoulder was excruciating, but the adrenaline gave him the strength to continue. Ethan ran out of breath, the bearded man chasing him like a madman. The aisles of Walmart turned into a labyrinth of shadows and terrors, where every corner hid a danger. Ethan felt the bearded man getting closer, his heavy breathing blowing on his neck. He knew he couldn't keep running forever. It was only a matter of time before he caught him. Desperate, Ethan looked for an exit, a way out of this nightmare. He turned around and saw a half-open door at the end of the corridor. It was an emergency exit, his only hope of survival. Ethan ran towards the door with all his strength, the bearded man now only a few steps away. He threw open the door and rushed outside, into the darkness of the night. The fresh air filled his lungs, making him feel the life coursing through his veins. He had survived. He looked back, but the bearded man was gone. He had disappeared into the night, as if he had never existed. Ethan stood there, trembling and terrified for a few minutes. Then, he walked to his car and drove away from the Walmart, leaving that nightmare behind. Ethan never went back to that Walmart. That night, he had seen evil in the face, and he had only survived by a miracle. The trauma of that experience haunted him forever, leaving a deep wound in his soul. He never told anyone what had happened, too afraid to be believed. He simply changed jobs, finding one that didn't require him to work at night. But every time night fell, Ethan would think back to that bearded man, his yellow eyes and his cruel smile. And he knew that, in a dark corner of his heart, the terror of that night would remain forever.